The wind moved across the desert like an old spirit, carrying whispers of the past. The red horizon stretched endlessly, glowing under the setting sun. Dust rolled over the land, and somewhere in the distance, a lone rider guided his horse through the golden light. His face was calm but worn, carved by years of survival and silence. He was an Apache warrior, known to his people for his honor and strength. His name was Tokata, meaning friend to all, though few outside his tribe ever saw that side of him. To most settlers, he was just another Indian warrior, someone to be feared or misunderstood. But Tokata lived by a different code, one that tied him deeply to the land, the sky, and every living thing between. That evening, as the last of the sunlight faded over the hills, Tokata found himself far from his village. He had been tracking a group of horse thieves for 2 days. They had stolen from his people and left no sign of mercy for those who stood in their way. His instincts guided him more than the trail did. And though his body ached with fatigue, he pressed on, knowing his honor demanded it. The path wound through thick mesquite and sagebrush until he reached a stream that shimmered under the moonlight. He stopped his horse beside the water and listened. Somewhere nearby, he heard the quiet sound of someone moving. His hand went to the knife at his belt, his body tense as the sound grew clearer. It wasn't the movement of men or horses, but something softer, a faint splash, the sound of water being disturbed. He stepped closer, crouching behind a fallen log, peered through the brush. There, in the pale light of the moon, was a young woman. She was bathing in the stream, unaware that anyone was near. Her clothes were folded neatly on a rock, and her back was turned to him as she poured water over her shoulders. Tokata froze, unsure what to do. He hadn't meant to spy or intrude. He had only followed the sound out of caution. But now he found himself trapped in a moment that could destroy him if misunderstood. He turned his head away at once, his heart pounding. To the Apache, seeing a woman unclothed, especially one who was not his wife, was a grave matter of respect and shame. To the settlers, it could mean something worse. Tokata stepped back quietly, trying to leave before she noticed. But just as he did, his foot snapped a branch beneath him. The sound cracked through the stillness. The woman gasped, spinning around and pulling her dress against her chest. "Who's there?" she cried, her voice shaking with fear and anger. Tokata raised his hand slowly, stepping into the moonlight to show he meant no harm. "I did not mean to see," he said in broken English. "I came for water, not for you." Her eyes widened when she saw him, the paint on his face, the feathers in his hair, the bow slung across his back. She had heard stories about Apache warriors, stories told by soldiers and travelers who called them wild, dangerous, savage. Her fear turned into rage. "You stay right there," she shouted. "If you move, I'll scream for help." Tokata stayed still, lowering his gaze. "You are safe," he said quietly. "I go." But before he could mount his horse, she screamed anyway. Within moments, 2 men appeared from behind the trees, rifles in their hands. They were ranch hands from a nearby homestead. And when they saw her clutching her dress, they didn't stop to ask questions. "What's he done?" One of them barked. "He was watching me," she cried, tears filling her eyes. "He saw me naked." Tokata tried to speak, to explain, but his words were drowned out by the click of a rifle being cocked. The taller man stepped closer. "You hurt her, savage. You violated her privacy. You'll answer for that." He tied his hands before he could protest, and though Tokata could have fought back, he didn't. He knew fighting would only confirm their worst beliefs. They led him toward their camp as the woman dressed in silence, still shaken but glancing at him from time to time. Her name, he would later learn, was Clara. She wasn't cruel by nature. But fear had spoken louder than reason that night. By the time they reached the ranch, word had already spread. The settlers gathered near the fence line, murmuring among themselves. "Caught an Apache spying on a woman," someone said. "That's a hanging offense if you ask me." Others nodded, spitting tobacco and muttering curses. Tokata stood tall, despite the ropes cutting into his wrists. He had faced worse before, but never had he felt this kind of helplessness to be judged without truth, to be punished for something he didn't do. The next morning, the sheriff arrived from the nearest town. He was an older man with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much. When he heard the accusation, he sighed heavily. Law says if a man compromises a woman's modesty, he's got two choices. Marry her or face the jailhouse, he said, scratching his chin. That's how it's written around here. The crowd murmured again, some laughing, others looking uneasy. Clara's face turned pale. Marry him? She whispered. That's not possible. She didn't finish, but everyone knew what she meant. To her, he was an Indian, someone from a world far different than hers. Takoda looked at the sheriff and said in a steady voice, I will not marry a woman who hates me, and I did no wrong. The sheriff nodded slowly. Then you'll sit in a cell until the judge decides. Could be a week, could be months. They led him away as Clara stood frozen, watching him disappear into the horizon. Something in her chest ached, confusion, guilt, maybe both. She had spoken out of fear, not truth. And now that fear had chained an innocent man in the small jailhouse on the edge of town. Takoda sat quietly, staring out through the iron bars. The world beyond was changing fast, railroads coming through, new towns rising, and old ways fading. His people were being pushed farther from the lands they once roamed freely. And now he, too, had become a prisoner of that change. Days passed, and word of the incident spread even farther. Some saw him as a criminal, others as a victim of misunderstanding. Clara couldn't sleep. Each night she heard the sheriff's words echoing in her head. Marry him, or see him locked away. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about justice. Truth and the line between two worlds that refused to understand each other. One evening, unable to bear the weight of her guilt, Clara went to the jail. She found Takoda sitting by the window, silent as the sunset fell behind the hills. I came to say, I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean for things to go this far. He looked up at her, his eyes steady, but not unkind. You spoke what you believed, he said softly. But belief and truth are not the same. She hesitated, her hands trembling. If I tell them I lied, they won't believe me. They'll say I'm covering for you. The only way to set you free is... Her voice broke and she looked away, unable to finish. Takoda understood. The old law, unfair as it was, left them only to paths, one that bound them by a lie and one that destroyed his freedom. Neither felt right. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, and the wind began to stir the dust again. The sky grew darker as if the land itself was holding its breath. Clara took a step closer to the bars. Maybe there's another way, she said quietly. Something they don't see coming. Takoda's eyes narrowed slightly, searching her face for meaning. What way? He asked. She didn't answer right away. The sound of rain began to fall, slow and heavy, tapping against the roof. Her eyes glistened with the same uncertainty that filled the air. You'll have to trust me, she said, even if the world won't. And as lightning flashed across the sky, she turned and walked away. Leaving him in silence, but for the first time since that night by the stream, the silence felt alive with something new. Not fear, not shame, but the faint, trembling start of hope that maybe fate wasn't yet done with either of them. The rain lasted most of the night, soft at first and then steady, soaking the dry ground and washing the dust from the rooftops. Inside the small jailhouse, Takoda sat by the window, listening to the drops tapping against the bars. His thoughts drifted between the past and present, between the open lands of his people and the narrow walls that held him now. The scent of wet earth reminded him of home, the hills beyond the river where the air was always clean and the stars seemed close enough to touch. He thought of his mother's words, spoken long ago, before she passed. When the storm comes, she had said, it does not come to punish, but to cleanse. He wondered now if this storm had come to cleanse his fate too, or if it would leave him buried in mud like so many others, caught between two worlds. By morning, the sun broke through again, lighting up the muddy streets of the small frontier town. People went about their business as if nothing had changed. But beneath the calm, whispers moved through the saloon and the general store, whispers about the Apache warrior locked up in the jail, about the woman who had accused him. And about what might happen next? Clara walked through town with her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. She kept her eyes low, but she could feel the stares that followed her. Some of the women nodded to her politely, others turned away. A few of the men tipped their hats, though not kindly. She had become part of the story now, part of the gossip that ran through the town like wildfire. Every whisper carried a different version. Some said the warrior had attacked her, others said he had bewitched her with strange charms. None of it was true, but truth didn't seem to matter much anymore. "Don't lie to me," the sheriff said firmly, cutting her off. "You've got a good heart, Clara, but you don't know what you've done. That man's an Apache warrior. If he runs into the hills, every settler from here to the fort will think he's planning revenge. You've just started a fire that'll be hard to put out." Her eyes widened. "He's not going to hurt anyone. He just wanted to go home. Doesn't matter what he wants," the sheriff said, grabbing his hat. "What matters is what people believe. And around here, belief is stronger than truth." He stepped out into the muddy street, calling for his horse. Within minutes, he and a few men were riding off into the dark hills. Clara watched from the window, her heart heavy. The guilt that had haunted her before now twisted into fear. She hadn't only endangered Dakota, she had put the whole town on edge. Out in the wilderness, Dakota moved swiftly along the riverbank. The night air was cool, and the sky above was crowded with stars. He had grown up in these lands, learned every rock and tree, every path that led through the canyons. Yet now, the land felt different. Not because it had changed, but because it no longer belonged to his people. Soldiers had driven the tribes deeper into the desert, where water was scarce and life harder with each passing year. He knew returning to his village might bring trouble. Staying here meant death. As dawn began to break, he found a place to rest under a ledge of rock. He tied his horse in the shade and knelt beside the stream, washing his hands. The cold water brought clarity. He thought of Clara, the woman who had once feared him, then freed him. He could not understand why she had done it, only that she had risked her own life to give him back his. In his mind, she had become something unexpected, a bridge between two worlds that had spent too long fighting. Back in town, the tension grew by the hour. By noon, word had spread that the Apache had escaped. Some men took up rifles and formed a search party while others locked their doors. The saloon buzzed with talk, most of it harsh and full of anger. "He won't get far," one of them said. "Once a savage, always a savage." Clara sat alone in her small house near the edge of town, staring at her father's old rifle on the wall. The sheriff's words echoed in her head. Belief is stronger than truth. She knew he was right. The people here didn't see Dakota as a man. They saw a symbol of everything they feared. She wanted to tell them the truth, but fear still held her back. If she confessed, they'd call her a liar or worse. Say she was protecting him for reasons they'd twist in ugly ways. As the search party disappeared into the hills, Clara made her decision. She packed a small satchel with bread, dried meat, and a blanket, then saddled her horse. She couldn't sit and wait. If they found Dakota before she did, there would be no chance to save him. She rode out quietly, following the same river path he had taken. The land stretched out wide and lonely ahead of her. The tracks were faint, but visible, the print of a single horse and the mark of bare feet beside the water. She followed them for hours until the sun hung high overhead, burning hot against her skin. When she finally found him, he was kneeling by the stream. His horse grazing nearby, he turned at the sound of her horse's hooves and rose slowly, his hand instinctively going to his knife before he recognized her. "You should not be here," he said. "They're looking for you," she said, climbing down from her horse. "Half the town is out there with guns." I know," he replied, "but I will not hide forever. If they want war, they will find only silence. I have no wish to fight." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then let me help you. There's a place up north, near the old mission. Hardly anyone goes there anymore. You can rest there until things calm down." He looked at her with quiet suspicion. "Why do you risk this?" "I told you before," she said. "Because I owe you the truth. And because you don't deserve to die for something you didn't do? For a long time, he said nothing. Then he nodded once. We go at night. Too many eyes in daylight. They waited under the rocks until the sun dipped below the horizon. In that time, Clara learned more about him than she expected. He spoke of his people, of how they lived close to the land, of how the soldiers and settlers had taken more each year until the earth itself began to turn against them. His voice held no hatred, only weariness. My father taught me that peace is not given, he said. It is made one truth at a time. But when both sides forget the truth, peace dies. Clara listened, feeling her throat tighten. My father used to say something like that. He believed this land was big enough for everyone, but not everyone believed him. As darkness returned, they rode together through the quiet plains, keeping to the shadows. The night was cool, and the stars seemed brighter out here, far from town. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. But that peace didn't last. Not far behind them, the sheriff's search party had split into groups. One of the men, a young ranch hand named Eli, found Clara's horse tracks alongside Tokota's. He knew enough to recognize her saddle marks. He followed them quietly, his lantern low. He liked Clara, always had, but now suspicion clouded his thoughts. What was she doing out here with that Apache? He turned his horse toward the others to report what he'd found. By the time morning came, Clara and Tokota reached the old mission. It was half broken, the roof caved in, vines crawling up its stone walls. Birds nested in the bell tower, and the air smelled of dust and wildflowers. It had once been a place of worship, but now it was only a shell, forgotten by both settlers and tribes alike. This will do, Tokota said, dismounting. The land remembers this place. They made a small fire inside what had once been the chapel. Clara handed him the bread she'd brought, and he shared water from his canteen. For a while, they ate in silence, both lost in thought. But their moment of peace was short. In the distance, a horse whinnied. Then another. Clara's head snapped up. They're coming, she said. Tokota rose, his hand tightening on his knife. Then they already know. The sound grew louder voices, the jingle of metal, the creak of saddles. Clara's pulse quickened. You can't fight them, she whispered. There are too many. He glanced at her, his face calm. Then I will not fight. But they must hear truth before they shoot. Before she could answer, the first shadow appeared at the edge of the ruins. Eli, rifle raised, his eyes hard with confusion and hurt. Behind him came the sheriff and two other men. The early light spilled across the cracked stone floor. Clara, the sheriff said, his voice weary but steady. Step away from him. She didn't move. Please listen to me. He didn't do anything wrong. Eli shook his head. You shouldn't have come out here. People are saying you helped him escape. They'll hang him for that, and maybe you too. Tokota stood still, his hands open to show he carried no weapon. I am not your enemy, he said. But if you kill me now, the peace between your people and mine will die with me. The sheriff looked torn, glancing between them and the men behind him. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the open land. Nobody spoke for several long moments. Then, from somewhere in the distance, came the faint sound of more horses, not settlers, but riders from the Apache camp. They had been tracking Tokota too. Both sides froze, staring across the rising dust. Clara had come to the town 3 years earlier with her father, a man who had worked hard to build a small ranch on the edge of Apache lands. He had believed that peace could exist between settlers and natives if both sides respected the land. But peace was fragile in those parts, and fear was stronger than friendship. When her father died in a cattle raid blamed on a neighboring tribe, Clara was left alone, trying to survive on what little he left behind. She worked hard and learned to shoot and ride, earning the respect of a few and the pity of most. But the world was not kind to a woman alone. Every day felt like a battle to keep her place. Now that battle had taken a strange turn. She hadn't wanted to hurt Tokota, not truly. She had been scared that night, startled and ashamed. Her scream had come before she could think, and once the words were out, there was no taking them back. The town's laws were strict, and its judgment even stricter. And though she tried to tell herself it wasn't her fault, her conscience refused to let her rest. She stopped outside the sheriff's office, staring at the wooden door. Inside, she could hear voices, the sheriff talking with a man whose tone carried authority. The man was a government agent sent from the nearby fort, judging by the sound of his polished boots and clipped speech. "The Apache situation is growing tense," he said. "We can't afford another misunderstanding to stir things up. If this man is guilty, make an example of him. If he's innocent, get him off our hands quietly," the sheriff sighed. "He's no criminal, but folks want blood or a wedding. I can't change the law." "You don't have to," the agent replied. "Just make it go away." One less problem to worry about. Clara's heart pounded. She turned from the door, her thoughts racing. Make it go away could mean anything, even death. She knew what some men did to prisoners they didn't want to deal with. She had seen it before, and she wouldn't let it happen again. That evening, as the sky turned orange and the town settled into quiet, she went to see Takada again. The sheriff was gone for the night, and the deputy was sleeping off his whiskey. She moved softly through the shadows and reached the barred window at the back of the jail. Takada looked up when he heard her footsteps. "You came back," he said in his calm, steady voice. "I had to," she whispered. "They're talking about sending you away. I don't know what they'll do, but it won't be fair." He studied her face for a moment before answering. "I thank you, but I am not afraid. My life is in the hands of the spirits, not theirs." She gripped the bars, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. These people, they won't listen to reason. Once they decide something, it's as good as done. If I don't do something, they'll either hang you or ship you off to some camp out west." He held her gaze. "Then why do you care?" he asked quietly. "You could let them. You would be safe, and your name would stay clean." Clara hesitated. "Because it's wrong. Because I made this happen." Takada stood and stepped closer to the bars, the faint light catching the edge of his face. "You spoke from fear. Fear is a powerful enemy, even stronger than hate. But truth is stronger still." She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "Then help me make it right." "I can't do this alone." He said nothing for a while, then finally asked, "What is your plan?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I'll find a way. Maybe if we get you out of here quietly, you can go back to your people. The sheriff wouldn't have to answer to anyone if you just disappeared." Takada thought for a long moment. "To run would make me guilty in their eyes, and your people would never forget." "I don't care what they think anymore," she said. "I care about what's true." A faint smile touched his lips, though it held more sorrow than joy. "Then you are braver than most." The sound of footsteps made her freeze. She stepped back into the shadows as the deputy stumbled outside, rubbing his eyes. Takada turned away, pretending to sleep until the man went back inside. Clara waited until it was safe, then whispered, "Tomorrow night. Be ready." She left before he could answer, her heart pounding as she walked back through the empty streets. The moon followed her the whole way, pale and silent. Back in the jail, Takada lay awake, staring through the window at the stars. He thought of his people, of the campfires that would be burning far beyond the hills, and of the elders who taught him that honor was worth more than life. He didn't know whether to see Clara's plan as mercy or madness, but something in her eyes had stirred something forgotten. Trust the next day brought new tension. A group of townsmen gathered near the jail, demanding that justice be done. They called for the sheriff, waving their hats and shouting. The sheriff did his best to calm them, but the anger in the crowd was thick as smoke. "If the law won't act, we will," one man shouted. "A woman's been shamed and we won't stand for it." Clara heard them from inside the general store and felt her stomach twist. She wanted to run out and tell them the truth, but she knew it would only make things worse. If she admitted the truth now, they would turn on her too. She had only one choice left to set him free before the crowd decided his fate for him. When night fell again, the town grew still. The rain clouds had drifted away, leaving the sky clear and full of stars. Clara crept back to the jailhouse with a small lantern and a ring of keys she had taken from the sheriff's desk. She moved quietly, her heart pounding in her ears. Inside, Takada was waiting. You came, he said softly. I said I would, she whispered, fitting the key into the lock. Her hands shook, but she managed to turn it. The door opened with a slow creak. You have to go now, before anyone wakes. Tokuda stepped out, but didn't move right away. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. If I leave, you will suffer for it. She shook her head. I'll find a way to explain. Maybe I'll say, you overpowered me, he frowned. That would make them hunt me, and I'll say nothing. Just go, he hesitated, then nodded. You risk much for me. I will not forget. As he stepped into the night, the sound of a horse whinnied nearby. Both froze. Lantern light appeared down the road, the sheriff returning earlier than expected. Clara turned to Tokuda, panic in her eyes. Go through the back, toward the hills, she whispered. Follow the river until it bends north. You'll find cover there. Tokuda looked at her one last time. If the spirits are kind, we will meet again. He vanished into the darkness, silent as the wind. Moments later, the sheriff's boots sounded on the porch. Clara stood frozen, the open cell door behind her, the keys still in her hand. The light from his lantern fell across her face as he stepped inside, and his eyes narrowed when he saw the empty cell. Where is he? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Clara's lips parted, but no words came out. The truth burned on her tongue, yet fear held it there. The rain had stopped, but inside that small room, the storm was just beginning. The sheriff's lantern swayed slightly as he stepped further into the dim jailhouse, his eyes sweeping over the open cell door. The air hung thick with the smell of oil, dust, and rain-soaked wood. Clara stood still, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk behind her. The faint creak of his boots filled the silence. Where is he? He asked again, his voice quieter this time, but sharper. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The calm tone carried more danger than any raised voice could. Clara tried to breathe normally, but her chest felt tight. He's gone, she whispered. When I came in, the door was open. The lock looked broken. The sheriff set down his lantern on the table and studied her face. The lock looked broken? He repeated slowly. You expect me to believe that? I don't know how it happened, she said quickly. Maybe someone helped him. Maybe the men outside were right. Maybe he had friends nearby. He didn't answer right away. He walked to the cell, running his fingers over the metal door. It wasn't forced. There were no signs of a struggle. Just an unlocked door swinging gently on its hinges. He turned back to her. You were here, weren't you? Clara's throat tightened. I just came to see if he was all right. I didn't think he'd... The old mission stood silent between them, a line dividing two worlds that had been colliding for generations. The moment felt like the calm before something neither side could stop, and Clara realized. The choice she made next could change everything. The air felt heavier as the sun climbed higher, throwing long shadows across the ruins of the old mission. The ground was dry and cracked beneath the horses' hooves, and the silence between the two groups carried more danger than words ever could. The sheriff sat stiff in his saddle, eyes darting between Tokuda and the approaching Apache riders. Behind him, Eli gripped his rifle tighter, torn between fear and loyalty. And in the middle stood Clara, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The Apache riders slowed as they drew near, their faces painted with red and black earth. They were silent, their movements steady, their eyes sharp and unreadable. At their front was an older man, his hair streaked with gray and his expression carved from stone. He dismounted first, placing his hand over his chest, a gesture of respect, though it didn't ease the tension in the air. Tokuda stepped forward. Father, he said quietly, his voice steady despite the danger surrounding him. The older man, Chief Nantan, regarded him closely. You are far from our land, he said in Apache, though his eyes flicked toward the armed settlers. And not alone. I was taken, Tokuda replied, accused of dishonor, but I did nothing wrong. Chief Nantan's gaze moved to Clara, then to the sheriff. And now they hunt you, yes, Tokuda said. But this woman speaks truth. She freed me. The old chief nodded slowly, understanding more than Tokuda said aloud. Still, the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. Then she carries your fate now. The sheriff dismounted, his boots crunching on dry earth. We didn't come for a fight, he said, his tone firm but cautious. We came for the man who escaped jail. That's all. Nantan looked at him, his voice low but sharp. He escaped because your law is blind. Your people see what they fear and call it justice. The sheriff's jaw tightened. I don't make the law, Chief. I just keep it. For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind hissed through the broken walls, and a hawk cried high above, circling the ruins. Clara stood between them, trying to think, trying to breathe. She could see how fast this could turn from words to blood. One mistake, one pull of a trigger, everything would fall apart. Eli shifted uneasily, the weight of his rifle pulling at his arm. Sheriff, he whispered, we can't just stand here. Look how many they got. We're outnumbered. Quiet, the sheriff muttered. But Eli didn't lower his gun. Nantan's warriors stayed still, their hands near their bows, but not yet drawn. They didn't move to attack, but they didn't back away either. Their stillness was its own kind of warning. Tokuda took a slow step forward, raising his hands. There does not have to be blood here, he said. I will go with you, Sheriff, if it means peace, Clara said quickly, stepping in front of him. You can't. If you go back, they'll hang you. The sheriff's eyes flicked to her. You're the one who set him free, weren't you? Her lips parted, but she couldn't lie anymore. Yes, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Because he didn't do what I said. I was scared. I made a mistake, and now everyone's paying for it. The words hung heavy in the air. The men behind the sheriff shifted, muttering. Eli lowered his rifle slightly, confusion clouding his anger. The sheriff's face hardened as he turned toward her. You don't know what you've just done, he said. I know, she answered. But it's the truth. The Apache chief studied her closely. Few have the courage to speak truth when it costs them everything, he said quietly. Your spirit is strong? The sheriff let out a long breath. Truth or not, this won't stop the others. Words already spread. The fort's men are coming. They'll bring more than rifles next time. Tokuda turned toward his father. Then we must leave before they come. If the soldiers find us together, they'll call it a rebellion. Nantan nodded once, but his eyes lingered on Clara. She cannot go with us, he said. Her people will call her traitor. She's already marked as one, Tokuda replied. Clara stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. If I go back now, they'll never believe me again. They'll say I lied for you. Maybe I did. But I can't let this end with you dying for it. The sheriff looked away for a moment, his thoughts heavy. He had seen too much death already, too many men buried for pride or politics. You both need to disappear, he said finally. The further from here, the better. I'll tell them I never found you. Nantan's eyes narrowed. You would protect him? I would protect peace, the sheriff said. And I'm tired of burying people over fear. Before anyone could speak again, a sharp whistle echoed from the distance. One of the Apache scouts rode in fast, his horse kicking up dust. Riders, he called. Soldiers from the fort? They are less than an hour away. Everyone froze. The sound of distant hoofbeats began to rise like thunder across the plains. Nantan turned to Toka. You lead her away. I will stay and speak with them. Tokuda shook his head. If they find you here, they will not listen. Then I will make them listen, the old chief said firmly. Go now, before it is too late. Clara hesitated, her eyes darting between them. You can't just wait for them. They won't talk. They'll shoot. The chief smiled faintly. I have lived through worse. Go. The decision came too quickly for thought. Tokuda grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the horses. They mounted and turned toward the canyon beyond the hills. The sheriff watched them go, then swung onto his own horse. I'll try to buy you time, he said before galloping off toward the soldier's path. The ride through the canyon was rough. The narrow trail winding between jagged rocks and tall cliffs. The sun burned low behind them, casting long shadows that stretched like ghosts across the ground. Clara clung to her saddle, her fingers numbed from gripping the reins. Every sound echoed the clatter of hooves, the distant shouts of men, the faint cry of hawks above, Dakota led the way, his posture steady, but his eyes were restless. "The river bends north ahead," he said. "We can follow it into the high country. They won't find us there." Clara nodded, though her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Do you think your father will be all right?" He didn't answer right away. "He knows how to stand against them. But I fear they will not come to listen." The canyon walls grew narrower, the trail steeper. They rode until the horses were slick with sweat. Clara's heart pounded with every step. Behind them, she could hear faint shouts and the echo of gunfire. It was still far, but close enough to make her stomach twist. "We're not going to make it," she whispered. Dakota looked back, his face shadowed by worry. "We will. Trust me." They reached the end of the canyon just as night began to fall. The sky was streaked with red and purple, the wind rising again. Dakota stopped his horse and looked out over the valley below. From here, they could see smoke rising in the distance. From the old mission, Clara's breath caught. The soldiers are there. The next morning, when they woke, the chief was gone, his spirit gone to the wind, his body still and peaceful. They buried him beneath a lone cedar tree by the river, where the water ran clear and steady. Dakota placed his father's bow beside him and whispered a prayer in his language. Clara stood beside him, her hand on his arm, feeling the quiet weight of the moment. When the sun rose, its light touched the water, turning it to gold. It felt like the land itself was honoring him. They stayed there for a long time, until the air warmed and the birds began to sing. Then, together, they turned toward the mountains. There was no need for words. Some stories didn't need to be spoken to be understood. By the time they reached the high country, the world had softened. The grasses grew thick again, and the air smelled of pine and freedom. Clara looked at Dakota and smiled faintly. "Do you think the others will ever stop fighting?" He watched the wind move through the trees. "Someday," he said. "But even if they don't, we will know we tried." As they rode on, the valley opened below them, wide and endless. The river wound through it like a silver thread, glinting under the morning sun. The sound of the water followed them, a reminder that peace, no matter how fragile, could still exist in a world so full of noise. Their journey wasn't over, but something inside both of them had changed. They had seen what fear could destroy and what courage could save. And in that quiet stretch of land where the river met the hills, their story became part of the earth's own memory, carried forward by the wind, retold in whispers by those who still believed in truth, love, and the power of forgiveness to heal what history tried to break, top of form, bottom of form. He nodded grimly. "And so is my father." She turned to him. "We can't just leave him. He told us to go," Dakota said quietly. "If we return now, we'll both die. But if we don't, he will," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Then this is your choice too." The wind howled through the cliffs, and for a moment, all sound seemed to fade. Clara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the guilt, the fear, the impossible choice between freedom and loyalty. She glanced toward the smoke again, then back at Dakota. "If we go back," she said softly, "it has to be for something more than survival." He nodded. "Then we go for truth." Before they could move, a sharp crack split the air. A bullet struck the rock beside them, sending shards flying. The horses reared, snorting in panic. From the ridge above, figures appeared, soldiers' rifles glinting in the fading light. "Go." Dakota shouted. They urged the horses forward, racing down the narrow path. The soldiers fired again, their shots echoing through the canyon. Dust rose in thick clouds around them, and Clara could barely see. Her heart hammered, fear and adrenaline mixing until her hands shook on the reins. Ahead, paths split, one leading toward the open desert, the other back toward the burning mission. Dakota slowed for only a second, torn between escape and duty. He turned to Clara. "If we take the desert, we live," he said. "If we go back, we change everything." The firelight flickered on the horizon, and the sound of drums, Apache war drums, carried faintly on the wind. Clara looked toward the flames, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Then let's go where the truth is." Dakota met her eyes, then turned his horse toward the smoke. The riders charged down the narrow trail, the sound of hooves echoing like thunder as the first stars began to appear. The soldiers followed close behind, the night alive with gunfire and firelight. The air was thick with tension, every heartbeat pulling them closer to a moment that would decide everything: the fate of the warrior, the woman who saved him, and the fragile peace hanging between two worlds that could no longer avoid the storm coming for them both. The fire spread fast across the dried grass near the mission, painting the night sky with orange light. Smoke curled into the stars, and the air was thick with the sounds of shouting, gunfire, and the cries of frightened horses. Clara and Tokuda rode hard through the smoke, their faces streaked with dust and fear. The closer they came to the ruins, the more they could see how quickly everything had fallen apart. Soldiers had surrounded the old stone walls, and the Apaches stood their ground behind what cover they could find. It was chaos, the kind that left no room for hesitation or mercy. Tokuda reined in his horse behind a fallen wall. His eyes darted through the haze, searching for his father. The flames lit half the battlefield, flickering over faces that were both familiar and strange. Clara stayed close, her heart pounding. She could feel the tremor in the ground from running, men and the crack of rifles that echoed against the canyon walls. Then she saw him. Chief Nantan stood near the entrance of the mission, tall and steady despite the madness around him. His bow hung at his side, but he wasn't fighting. He was speaking, his voice raised in Apache, trying to be heard over the noise. The soldiers hesitated, unsure, but the officer in charge didn't seem to care for peace. His rifle was already aimed. Tokuda, Clara said, pointing. Tokuda followed her gaze. The moment he saw his father in the officer's sights, he didn't think he ran. Clara jumped off her horse and followed, her feet hitting the ground hard. Tokuda sprinted through the smoke, his voice hoarse from shouting. "Father!" The officer fired. The shot struck Nantan's shoulder, spinning him around. The chief fell to his knees, but did not cry out. The soldiers raised their guns again, and that was when Tokuda reached them. He slammed into the officer, knocking the rifle away. They hit the ground hard, rolling through the dirt as others shouted orders. The Apache warriors surged forward in response. Arrows flying through the haze, Clara ducked behind a crumbling wall, coughing as the smoke thickened. Her eyes burned, but she refused to look away. She saw Tokuda fight with the kind of strength that came from more than muscle. It came from love, from desperation, from the fire of someone who had already lost too much. When the officer went down, Tokuda grabbed his father and pulled him back toward cover. Nantan's breathing was ragged, but he was alive. Clara rushed to help, pressing her shawl against the wound. The old chief looked at her through the haze and gave a faint smile. "You came back," he whispered. Clara nodded, tears streaking through the soot on her face. "We couldn't leave you." The fighting around them slowed as the soldiers began to pull back. The sheriff had arrived, riding through the smoke with his men. His voice carried above the chaos, ordering a ceasefire. The soldiers hesitated, but they obeyed. The sudden silence was jarring after all the noise, broken only by the crackling of fire and the groans of the wounded. Tokuda looked up to see the sheriff dismount, his expression weary. "You did what I told you not to?" he said quietly. Tokuda met his gaze. "You told me to disappear? But peace doesn't live in hiding." The sheriff glanced at the wounded chief, then at Clara. "You'll both hang if the fort hears about this." "Then let them hear the truth," Clara said firmly. "Tell them I lied. Tell them he's innocent. Tell them we tried to stop the fighting." The sheriff sighed. "They don't care about truth, miss. They care about order. And you tell them what order looks like when it's covered in smoke and blood," she said. Her voice didn't shake this time. The sheriff stared at her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "I'll do what I can," he said. "But you need to go. Both of you." Tokuda turned to his father, who struggled to sit up. "Can you ride?" Nantan nodded slowly. "For a little while. Enough to leave this place behind." The Apache gathered their wounded, moving quietly and quickly into the darkness. Tokuda helped his father onto a horse, while Clara led hers by the reins. The sheriff stood by the burning mission, watching them fade into the shadows. He knew he might never see them again, but deep down, he didn't want to. Some stories were better left untold. By dawn, the sky was pale and empty. The smoke had thinned, and the land looked wounded but still. They rode until the sound of the river reached their ears, a calm murmur that felt like mercy after all the noise. There, among the cottonwoods, they stopped. Nantan rested by the water, his wound cleaned and bandaged. The morning light softened the lines of his face, making him look peaceful. "The world changes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But hearts must not forget what they fight for." Tokoda sat beside him. "What will we do now?" His father smiled faintly. "We go home. Not to war, but to rebuild. The land will remember those who stood for peace." Clara sat nearby, silent, her eyes on the river. She thought of the town they had left behind, the whispers, the fear, the hate that had driven so many to this moment. She wondered if any of them would ever understand what had really happened. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe some truths were meant to live quietly. Far from the places where people shouted over one another, Takoda turned to her. "You could still go back. No one would blame you." She shook her head. "I can't," I said. "I'd help you find peace. That promise doesn't end here." He looked at her, something like gratitude softening his face. "Then stay until you find your own peace too." For a while they sat in silence, the sound of the river washing over them. It was strange how something so calm could follow so much violence. The earth smelled like rain, though the sky was clear. Somewhere far away, a coyote called, its cry echoing through the valley. Days passed as they moved north, deeper into Apache land. Clara helped tend to the wounded, learning more each day about the people she once feared. They were not ghosts or savages. As others said, they were families, with laughter, with songs, with hearts that bled the same as anyone else's. And as she learned, she began to feel lighter. The chief recovered slowly, though the wound left him weaker than before. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, he called Tokoda and Clara to him. His eyes were steady, calm. "You have both walked through fire," he said. "Now you must decide what kind of world you wish to walk in next." Clara looked toward the horizon. "A world that listens," she said softly. Tokoda nodded. "A world where truth doesn't die with the ones who speak it." Nantan smiled, closing his eyes. "Then remember that every choice builds that world stone by stone."